and then make it where Amber has to take care of me. David, that's not a scenario that I want to be in. I say, God, I trust in you. I can ask that thing with confidence because I can do the checklist of my life. You know, am I trying to serve God? Am I trying to be a good man? Am I out doing these things? Am I living in willful sin? You know, am I doing these things? No, I'm not. So then, okay, I believe that I have rights to go to my God. That being said, we've met, I would call it, the basic requirements for Social Security. Anything like that, you know, you had to have these requirements that you had to meet. And so I went to him, I presented my petition before God, and I laid it out to him, but I said, God, whether you want it or whether you don't want it, it's up to you. You're ultimately God. This is ultimately. But I'm also a believer in the fact the Bible says specifically, if any of you sick, bring them before, let the elders lay hands on them and pray them. But there's the other problem is that the elders, if the elders, David, are not elders, and they're not acting as elders, they're not living as elders. In other words, an elder in the church has a certain lifestyle that he has to live by. And he has a certain thing that he has to do. If he is out in sin and acting like anybody else or worse, then what's the odds on God's hearing his prayer? He's already cursed because he's not living the God's life. Does that make sense? You know, the thing is that going to, and again, you don't go to the bar, go to the bar. I don't give a crap. It ain't up to me. That's your choice. But I don't believe that if you're cheating on your wife or whatever you're doing and having all these different things and you're doing all these things and your words and your actions did not line up with the Word of God, I'm not going to have you pray for me or my family. Why? Because there are things that are passed through the laying on of hands. I've seen that. I have felt that. I'm not going to let just anybody pray for my family. You can pray from your distance all you want to, but I don't know what God you pray for. It's like anybody saying, well, I have an unspoken prayer request. Okay, great. God hear whatever you want him to hear. I'm not going to agree with you. I'm not going to stand with it because what if you're praying to leave your wife because you want to get married again? I just said I would agree to that. I don't agree to something I don't know. I'm not entering into a contract. But when I prayed it, I said, God, look, I trust in you. I'm laying my petition out there. I'm in a position to where I believe that you will hear my prayer. That being said, about a week or so ago, I actually had, for some reason, I had wiped my face. And AJ, I was like, it's gone. I mean, it's a big old bump. And I was like, it's gone. And I went and shaved. I hadn't been able to shave in weeks. And I was like, this is all right. But now what you going to do? Now what are you going to do? So now when I go out there, I make sure that I've got protection. I make sure I've got sunblock. I'm making sure that I'm being protected. Why? Because God's given me a pass. I'm not tempting him again. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah. I make that choice, Zeke, to live that resolute life. I have resolved myself to this course of action. I have chosen this day the God that I'm going to serve. As I've said it, you choose whatever God you choose and however you choose to serve it. And yes, you can tell all the different things. And at the end of everything, if there is nothing, I would rather have served a God that is nothing and lived a good life than to roll the dice. I just can't roll that dice. I can't make that wager. I have too much. I have David, Bailey. I've got Jacob in my life now. I've got my grandkids. I've got all you guys. I have to make sure that I'm choosing a better choice. You know, it's like there would be people that I would want to be jealous of or I would want to be, wrathful for. You know, it's like I told Jacob. I'm mad at Jacob because Jacob wouldn't come over and introduce himself. And I got madder at myself because Jacob would come introduce himself to me. And I asked my father-in-law, I said, Daddy, what'd you do? He said, well, I went and introduced myself. I said, so you went and introduced yourself? Oh, crap. And the thing is that it's not Jacob's job to prove himself to me. it's my job to be the bigger person. Does that make sense? It's my job to be the bigger person. But I'm always wanting to put the blame on somebody else. When I resolve the fact that it's my choice, I have to make this choice. Amber used to tell me a long time ago, and she's given up on it. She said, you have to be the bigger person. You have to be. Because if you're not, you will always be the what? Smaller person. What do you want to be at the end of the day? The thing is, tomorrow, we all know what we're going to do tomorrow. One way or another, we're all going some form of work, something that we're going to do, even if it's out in the yard, if it's whatever, even us, decrepit retired people. We have to make the choice to do something. I can't retire and do nothing. I have to make the choice. I can't depend upon someone else to hand me out. I have to make the choice. It says that within the power of your tongue, you can choose life or death. And what he's talking about there, you can have life, and you can have it more abundantly. You can choose that life. Or you can do the exact opposite. Remember, it said above all else, guard your heart, for everything that you do flows from it. So in other words, you have to make the choice to succeed. You have to make that choice. Because if you do not make the choice to succeed, what have you made the choice to do? If you don't make the choice to serve God, what have you made the choice to do? You know, every day we are faced with a choice. We're faced which life, which thing that we want to live. Myself personally, I want my physical life and spiritual life to be inseparable. I want them to just overlap. And if anything, I want my spiritual life to drive my physical life. Why? Why would I want my spiritual life to drive my physical life?
Where the physical life is going to end.
Where are you going to put your money at? Yeah. So the thing is that what we're facing right now, you know, I remember so many times the life of a young person. Dory, I know you will look back and we'll see the kids doing things and we'll go, oh God, I'm glad I ain't got to do that again. Someone says, oh, I wish I could go back and change it and I'd do so many things different. Number one, you know you wouldn't because you're still you. You're still going to make dumb choices because you're still driven by you. I told my father-in-law this. There was a friend of mine who told me that once you hit about 35 to 45, he says, once you're at that point, he says, you are the person you're going to be for the rest of your life. I said, I don't agree with that. I told him, I don't agree with that. I find that myself, I like me now better than I've ever liked me before. And I don't like me a lot, but I like me better. I find that I'm a closer person to God. I find that I'm trying to live closer. But I try to listen to Him better. I look for God. I look for ways to, again, to make sure that I am in a position that when God says, I need you to do this, that I'm like, He says, I can choose that guy. And I'll close on this story. I was working at Landers, and I remember where, I can't remember, I was at the driver's license office somewhere, and it was cold that day. Amber and I was working, you remember when I went to work, right when I first went to work for Landers, but before that, I was at Sidney Moncrief. And what happened at Sidney Moncrief, I was actually working for Napo's, doing some cement. And we just got done with a big pour at Tyson at Pine Bluff, and it was cold. It was cold, Lance. I mean, it was one of them. You found a reason to get off of the backhoe because there ain't nothing worse than riding around on a backhoe when it's cold. Because it's cold. There was no cab. And so we got snowed out, and so I had to go get tagged. And I remember going, I was like, man, I don't want to be in this snow and ice anymore. I'm done, Erica. I'm done being cold. And so I happened to open up the page, and CD Moncrief had a big old ad wanting to hire a body man. And it said, yeah. And so I was like, I can do that job. I'm certain I can be a body man, Dave. Never been a body man before, but I'm certain I can do it. The only question I asked this guy, didn't ask about pay or nothing. I said, you got a heater? And he said, well, yeah. Okay. When can I be there? He said, come on in. And the thing is that he is at the point because they couldn't hire any technicians. So if you can't hire a technician, you've got a good chance of getting that job. So I went to work for CD Moncrief. Long story short, I ended up going to work for Landers and moved down from Gwatney to Landers, and then from there, I'm at Landers. I'm still a tech out in Florida, working on a little neon, and they needed a production manager, and that's kind of where I was always geared towards being a production manager. And Scott Williams told me the story. He says him and Gary had walked out and they was looking in the shop. He said, man, I've got to hire a production manager. Because the production manager, United Auto Group, had just bought out Landers from Steve Landers. And so their production manager was a convicted felon. And they couldn't have convicted felons. And so he had to hire somebody. And he said that he was looking out there, and I stood up and I looked at him. And God basically told Scott, he says, there's your production manager right there. And Scott walked over, he says, hey, you want this? And I said, well, yeah. But the thing is that I didn't want to just be a production manager. I wanted to be a shop manager, so I knew if I could do a production manager job, that then I could get an estimator job, because I knew he was going. So when Randy Wirt left, I went in there and I made him a deal. I said, Scott, I said, if you'll give me a chance and train me to be an estimator, and so I will give you 3 years of my service. First year, I won't make you money, but I'll learn the job. The second year, I'll make you money. The third year, I will be your top producing estimator. I stayed 5 years and I had achieved all of them goals. I was his highest paid estimator. I had a goal and I had a promise that I made. God, if you do this right here, you give me this opportunity, I will do this right here. And I find that when I live that lifestyle, when I live that way, I don't have to worry about money, because I find that whatever money I have is enough. You don't have everything that you want, but you don't need everything that you want. He says, I'll supply all of your needs. God has been faithful beyond measure to take care of us, even to the point of when we're losing our business after I left Landers and everything's shutting down and I'm sitting out there. I said, God, I don't know what to do. I don't know what my next direction is, but if you will open the door, I will walk through it. That day, I'm in Greenbrier, saw Eddie Brock, who was my mortal enemy, came by there that day at our shop on his way to Branson, and he pulls up in there and he says, Monty, what are you doing? I knew it, man, when I seen him. I knew it. I was like, God, that's not my bargain. I didn't want that. But here it is, Zeke. He went way out of his way, on his way somewhere else, and he felt the need to pull in. He didn't really know where I was at. He just heard about different places, and this was my enemy. Me and him fought daily. Daily we fought. And God uses him. God says, will you submit? He paraded me through all the dealerships. I had to apologize for things I didn't even do. But you know what, Gary? I didn't give a crap. You know what I wanted? A check. I hadn't had a check the whole time we had business. I could not wait. When I got my first check, I called my wife. I said, guess what? I got a check. But what did it take me to do? I had to submit to him. But more than anything else, I had to choose. I resolved myself that whatever God would do, I would do it. He will help you. But somewhere along the lines, it's got to be an even trade. It's got to be an even trade. Because you can't live this way. You can't be married. How many women or men would stay or remain married to a person that's cheating on them and treating them like crap. Some of y'all idiots would. I'm not. My wife